Hello and welcome once again to Bible Talk with Bruce and Becky.
Coming to you from sunny Chattanooga,
No, no,
Tennessee.
no, no, no. You messed up my opening. We're on location at the site of ancient Shechem, where the patriarchs spent so much time in our story. It looks remarkably like the courtyard of our retirement apartments in Chattanooga, Tennessee, but a mere coincidence. See, I should let you know when I'm going to have a big time opening here.
We rehearse daily, yeah.
Our next rehearsal will be our first. But we are beginning the long awaited story of Joseph today. Let me just review where we've been and how Joseph fits into the overall story in Genesis. The first 11 chapters of Genesis are a special section of beginnings. In fact, we mentioned long ago that in Hebrew, this book is called Bereshith, which means in the beginning. It has the beginning of creation, the beginning of the human race, the beginning of sin that comes into the world, the beginning of languages.
Beginning of the promise to Abraham.
No, not in the first 11 chapters. That
Oh,
will be the next section. It
I'm just
has,
here to be wrong.
makes me look good.
Well, that's a bigger job than I want to take on.
How did we last 51 years together? The beginning of sin and the consequences which lead up to the flood, where God decides to destroy it all and start over. The beginning of languages. And then in chapter 12, we're introduced to Abraham, the key figure for the rest of Genesis, and the promises that are made to Abraham. Promise of land. What else was he promised?
That he would have a king on the throne forever and ever and ever.
No, I don't think so. There's no
That,
king in the promises. Many kings will come from him.
let's start over.
No, that's good. Three promises: land, many descendants, and that his descendants would bless the whole world. So we see that working out in the rest of Genesis.
So when do we get to the part where somebody's going to reign forever?
That's called David.
Yeah.
That would be in the books of Samuel. That promise is made to David. Good question.
Okay.
Where was I? Oh, the promise is renewed to Abraham's son Isaac and to his son Jacob. But with Joseph, a new element enters into the story. No longer is there a single patriarch that God communicates with, but the promises are expanded to all the sons of Israel. And Joseph has a role in preserving that. Another theme that we've been following as we come up to the story of Joseph is that it doesn't look like the promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob can be fulfilled. There's one obstacle after another. So it looks impossible from a human standpoint for God to fulfill his promises to the patriarchs. I'm going to give you another chance, Becky. What are some of the obstacles that we have encountered so far to the fulfillment of promises?
Old age.
Old age, and they were still barren, Abraham and Sarah. It was humanly impossible for her to have a child. They tried to get around it by using her handmaiden Hagar as a substitute wife, and she bore a son, Ishmael, but he was not the son of promise. But when Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90, they finally had a son. But what was the next obstacle that looked like it would be impossible to overcome?
Well, God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac.
Very good. You're making up credit here, Becky. Yes, how could he sacrifice the son of promise and yet many descendants come from him? But the Bible says in the New Testament that Abraham had figured out by this time that God could even raise the dead. So, in faithfulness, he started to sacrifice his son, but God stopped him. Other obstacles included Jacob being sent away to a foreign land, and his favorite wife, Rachel, was barren for a time. But God overcomes everything that would hold them back, including Abraham and Isaac's foolishness in trying to save their own necks at the risk of their wives. But we find in this story, the first book of the Bible, and it continues throughout, when human beings try to do things on their own, we usually mess up. In fact, we probably always mess up. When we depend on God and trust Him, then things go the way they should, according to His plan. Well, now we've come to this fellow Joseph, and his story will take up the rest of the book of Genesis. Maybe my favorite story in the Old Testament, the humanity of it, the characters that are introduced and their realistic depictions, and the pathos. You'd have to admit that there's pathos in the story.
Not pathos?
It could be pathos. They look a lot alike. You say pathos, I say pathos.
Just get on with it.
Let's move on. That's why Becky's here, to keep me from being any more foolish than I already am. It's pathetic.
There you go.
A lot of emotion in this story. And a happy ending, at least in Genesis. It doesn't stay happy very long.
We're not going to get to the happy ending today.
No, we'll get to the happy ending when we finish up Revelation sometime in the future. Well, chapter 37 of Genesis. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. I prefer a more literal translation here. Jacob settled down in the land of his father's wanderings. His father, Isaac, and his grandfather, Abraham, never settled down into a settled life in the land of Canaan. They sojourned. They were just visitors there. But Jacob settles down and establishes this place as their home. Notice these are the generations of Jacob, which introduces the rest of the story, but it's actually Joseph that they focus on. Jacob's youngest son at the beginning of the story. Well, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's concubines. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. And this next verse introduces why there is so much family conflict going on. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a garment. What kind of garment, Becky?
Well, it can be translated coat of many colors, or it...
Traditionally, it was translated a coat of many colors, and that translation will suffice because scholars, having worked on this for many years, have not been able to identify exactly what this robe was, because the word describing it is a hapax legomenon.
One-time usage.
Hey, way to go, Becky. Used only one time in the whole Bible. So how are you going to know what it is if you don't have a dictionary of biblical Hebrew, which they didn't have back then? It probably is some kind of ceremonial robe with long sleeves and reaching down to the ankles. It may have been made up of a quilt-like appearance, so there would be many colors. We don't know for sure. It indicated status. That as far as Jacob is concerned, Joseph has the highest status of all of his sons. And that's designed, of course, to make the other sons feel real good about Joseph. And it's obvious by the treatment of him that he is the father's favorite. And shouldn't Jacob have learned a lesson from his own family? Was there favoritism there?
Do we ever?
No, we usually don't until old age. Definitely favoritism by Rachel, favoring Jacob over Esau, and by Isaac, favoring Esau over Jacob. And so there's bound to be jealousy. And Joseph has 10 brothers that can be jealous, and they are. Especially after he tattles on them to his father.
10 brothers?
10 brothers at this point. Benjamin hasn't been born yet.
Okay.
Thank you for raising that question. What do we see about Joseph at this point? Well, let's wait till we get to his dreams, and they reveal a lot about his character. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made them this famous robe. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak a good word about him. And Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. Now, if Joseph hadn't been 17 years old and had a little sense, he would have kept his mouth shut about the dream, probably, at least at this point. But Joseph doesn't show good judgment here. In fact, in my many studies in psychology, I've had a few courses, it has been discovered that people's judgment part of their brain doesn't reach maturity until we're about 25 years old.
That's men.
That's men? Women sooner?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Thanks for bringing that up, Becky.
That's why you have to marry them young.
And raise them right?
No, that's why you have to marry a woman young while she's still stupid.
Well, you're 8 months younger than I. That's the best I could do.
So we were both stupid.
That's right. We were only a year away. We weren't entirely stupid. Well, Joseph is going to report to his brothers, "Hey guys, here's this dream that I have dreamed. Now we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And look, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." Now that's not hard to interpret, I don't think. That's probably why Joseph was reporting it. His brothers said to him, "Oh, are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. I might pause to point out that people younger than our generation might not know what a sheaf is unless they were raised on a farm. In fact, somebody pointed out that the old song, "Bringing in the Sheaves," people who didn't realize what that was would sing "Bringing in the Sheep" or "Bringing in the Sheets." Remind us what a sheaf is, Becky.
Well, even if you are raised on a farm anymore, you probably haven't seen a sheaf.
No, because they don't bind them in sheaves anymore. What was it?
It was, you take corn stalks or wheat and you gather it up in a bunch and bind it, and something you carry over your shoulder. And
right.
Harvest time, you put them all together somewhere to keep them dry.
And it would have been wheat or barley in this time. Although the King James Version refers to corn many times, it's the British usage of corn, which we would call wheat. They didn't have corn in the Middle East at this time, but yeah, you would tie the stalks together to make it easier to handle. And they were used to that. They would harvest the grain as well as keep the sheep. And then, to make it even worse, verse 9, Joseph dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Hey, look, I've dreamed another dream. It seems the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Something puzzling about this dream. A couple of things that are puzzling. What would the sun and moon stand for in the dream?
The mother and the father.
Mother and the father.
And the 11.
The 11 would be the brothers. What's the problem here? A couple of problems.
Well, you just told me he only had 10 brothers at this point.
At this time, it's looking forward a little bit. And where is his mother? We buried her a while back on the way to Bethlehem.
Yeah.
So it symbolically means the whole family, although it literally is not true at this point in the history. But it anticipates the birth of Benjamin, and it looks back on the time that Rachel was alive. Well, Becky, would you begin reading in verse 12 and go through 17?
Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, What are you seeking? I'm seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where are they pasturing the flock? And the man said, They have gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan.
Okay. I would have to say a lapse of judgment on Jacob's part here, or maybe he's getting old. Jacob must be aware that the brothers hate Joseph, and he sends Joseph out to get a report on the brothers, sending him into a dangerous situation. By the way, Becky, remind us, please, how far it was from where they're camped to Shechem.
Far enough to get lost.
It was about 50 miles. Quite a journey on foot for this young man to look for his brothers. He doesn't know exactly where they are. And of course, the man sends him on to Dothan. How much farther is it from Shechem to Dothan?
About a day's journey.
That's right. About 15 or 16 miles, which would be a good day's journey. They might make 20 miles on a really good day. But hey, you're wising up here. When in doubt, be vague.
Shoot the bull.
Blow the smoke. Well, we're being silly today. I think it's the outdoors.
It's the pollen.
Joseph is in a pretty dangerous situation here. Over 60 miles away from home with brothers who hate him and cannot say a good word about him. Well, they saw him from afar. So they're camped around this far. No, I'm ashamed. Before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. I've seen some dysfunctional families, but I have never yet, knock on wood, seen one where they're trying to kill each other, but I know they exist. So as they're conspiring, they said to one another, Here comes this dreamer, this translation says. It's a stronger word than just that. It could be translated, Here comes this master of dreams, this know-it-all who thinks his dreams mean something. Or you could even translate it, Here comes this one that's addicted to dreams. In other words, they hate him for his dreams, among other things, and they're being quite sarcastic here. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits or cisterns. Apparently, there were quite a few cisterns in the area. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, Let's not take his life. And Reuben said to them, Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. He intended to rescue him out of their hands to restore him to his father. Wonder why Reuben speaks up. What do we know about Reuben before this?
He was in disfavor also.
Why was he in disfavor?
Is he the one that messed around with his father's something?
Concubine,
Yeah.
yes. He had gone into his father's concubine not just out of lust, but as an apparent coup attempt. He's trying to take over the family. Now he's trying to win his father's favor back. And he also was the firstborn, so he's taking a leadership role here. So he offers an alternative plan, throw him in the cistern, and he intends to come back later to get him. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the long robe of status that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. It was empty. There was no water in it. And then they sat down to eat. That last sentence has always struck me. They're plotting to kill their brother. They alternatively throw him into a dry cistern where he will die of thirst and starvation. And then they sat down to eat. They're not fazed by this at all. Anything else you want to say at this point before we read on?
No, but there is a happy ending.
Don't give it away.
Okay.
What a surprise.
Okay.
Yeah, there is a happy ending. Way in the future. It's going to take 13 years to work out. All right, Becky, if you would start in verse 25 after they sat down to eat and read down to, just read to the end of the chapter.
Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, The boy is gone, and I, where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. And he identified it and said, It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning. Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an official of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard.
Okay. A caravan of merchants comes along. What kind of people were they? What was their native ethnicity?
Midian.
They're Midianites. Oh, I thought they were Ishmaelites.
Well,
It says both. See, you can't trust the Bible. They can't even decide whether these are Ishmaelites or Midianites.
There you go.
I've actually heard that argument used by people attacking the veracity of the Bible. They were both. They came from Midian, but they were descendants of Ishmael. You remember Ishmael?
Who doesn't?
Well, who was he?
Ishmael was the son of Hagar.
Right.
Hagar.
And the son of Abraham. These people are relatives, cousins, but not necessarily cousins on good speaking terms, or they may not have even known that. They're coming from Gilead. What do we remember? What do we remember about Gilead? There's a famous song.
The balm in Gilead.
There is a balm in Gilead, and sure enough, they're carrying gum, balm, and myrrh. All of these are made into ointments and used for healing primarily, as well as to make you smell better. They buy Joseph for the usual price of a slave, 20 shekels of silver. These brothers are not in it for the profit, apparently, because dividing 20 shekels of silver among 10 people, you wouldn't get much of a share. They just want to get rid of this brother, and I'm sure they thought they would never see him again. But they don't really consider their father's feelings. They leave him to think for the next 13 years that his son has been killed by a wild animal. Hard-hearted men. Will any of them change their character as the story goes along? We'll answer that question beginning next week, or next time in our episode, and we will see that not only Joseph, but at least some of his brothers grow in maturity and are sorry for what they've done. Well, let's quit for now, unless you have another point or question you want to bring up, young lady.
No, I think we got a cliffhanger here.
That's right. We're going to have several cliffhangers. But the question to ponder before next week is, what is the next chapter doing in the middle of the story of Joseph? The story of Judah and Tamar, his daughter-in-law. Doesn't seem to have anything to do with the surrounding context, but we'll chew on that and see if we can figure it out. Until then, thanks for tuning in again, and remember, don't send money. God bless you, and have a great week.
Bye.